She doesn't even know what day it is half the time, my daughter-in-law said. We're basically running this house now. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. I set my coffee down on the side table, very quietly, and walked back to the kitchen. I didn't say a word, but I heard every single one of hers. That was the moment I stopped being a mother-in-law and started being a witness. It had started 18 months before, on a Sunday in February, when my son called me from a parking lot. I could hear the wind through his phone. He said his name the way he used to when he was 12 and had broken something quiet, ashamed, already bracing. Mom, he said, we're in trouble. Diane and I lost the apartment. The landlord sold the building. We have 30 days. I didn't ask questions. I said, come here, bring the girls. My granddaughters were 4 and 6. Their names are Lily and June, and they smelled like grape shampoo and sleepiness when they arrived that Sunday evening with suitcases and a box of toys and a car seat that took 40 minutes to get through my front door. I had already cleared the 2 spare rooms upstairs. I'd put fresh sheets on both beds. I'd left a nightlight in the smaller room because June was still afraid of the dark. Diane hugged me in the doorway. She said, we won't be long, I promise. 3 months, maybe 4. I believed her. My husband passed 7 years ago. I live alone in a 4-bedroom house in a quiet part of town where I've been for over 30 years. I know the name of every neighbor on my block. I keep a garden in the back, and I make soup every Sunday, enough for the whole week. It's a good life, a full one. I had built it slowly, carefully, the way you build anything that lasts. I thought having family here would make it fuller. For the first few weeks, it did. The girls drew pictures at my kitchen table and taped them to the refrigerator. My son made coffee in the mornings and left a cup for me without being asked. Diane helped me carry in the groceries on Thursdays. We ate dinner together most nights. It felt like something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Then, one morning in April, I came downstairs and found a woman I had never met sitting at my kitchen table eating toast. Her name was Sandra. She was Diane's older sister. She had driven up the night before, Diane explained, very casually, because she was between apartments and needed a few days to sort something out. I smiled and said good morning to Sandra. I poured my coffee. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, no one asked me. Sandra stayed for 3 weeks. She used my bathroom products without asking. She moved the furniture in the living room because, she said, the energy felt blocked. She ate the leftovers I had labeled in the refrigerator with my own name on the container. When she finally left, I stood in my living room and looked at the rearranged furniture. The couch was 6 inches from where it had always been. The lamp I'd had since 1987 was in the corner, unplugged, because Sandra said the light gave her headaches. I moved everything back myself. My son noticed and looked embarrassed. He said, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd moved things. I thanked him for saying that. But what I kept thinking was, you didn't know because you weren't looking. And you weren't looking because you had stopped seeing me. That's how it works, I've come to understand. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual rearranging. Like furniture, 6 inches here, an unplugged lamp there, and eventually the whole room belongs to someone else. By June, Diane's mother had arrived. Her name was Carol. She came with 2 large suitcases and a small dog named Butterscotch, who was not housebroken. Diane introduced her at the door with the energy of someone announcing good news. Mom needed a break, she said, just for a little while. You don't mind, right? I looked at Carol, who was already peering past me into the hallway, examining my house with the expression of someone deciding whether to make an offer. I said, of course, come in. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because I didn't know how to say the other thing. Maybe because Diane had already said it for me in the form of a question that wasn't really a question. You don't mind, right? The kind of sentence that assumes its own answer. Carol minded everything about my house except the parts she could use. She minded the way I organized the pantry too cluttered, she said. You really should label things. She minded the bathroom towels, which she replaced with her own from her suitcase. She minded the television channels I preferred and the hours I kept, and the smell of the candle I burned in the evenings, which she called overwhelming. But she did not mind eating my food. She did not mind running my dishwasher twice a day. She did not mind using my washer and dryer every morning before I'd had my coffee. She did not mind taking June to school on Tuesdays and then stopping to shop at the grocery store with my car for 45 minutes and returning with 3 bags of items I hadn't asked for and 2 receipts she left on the kitchen counter expecting me to reimburse. The house had become something else. I moved through it like a guest. That October, I walked past the living room and heard Diane on the phone. Her voice was the kind of low that means she had calculated the distance between herself and whoever she thought might be listening. "She doesn't even know what day it is half the time," she said. "We're basically running this house now." I didn't move. I stood in the hallway and listened. "Her mom and I," Diane continued, "we've been doing everything. The cooking, the shopping. She just kind of wanders around. I'm honestly a little worried about her, you know? Like, how long before it's not safe for her to be alone?" I set my coffee down quietly. I walked back to the kitchen. I stood at the counter and looked out at the backyard, at my garden, at the rows of late-season tomatoes I had planted and watered and staked myself. My hands were steady. My mind was very clear. I knew what day it was. I knew exactly what was happening. I want to be specific about what I did next, because it matters. I did not cry. I did not confront anyone. I did not call my son into the kitchen and ask him what his wife had meant. Instead, I went to my bedroom, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I named it simply, My House. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. I kept a small notebook in my cardigan pocket. Every time Carol used my car, I wrote it down with the date and the mileage. Every grocery receipt I hadn't approved, I photographed and filed. I wrote down what Diane had said on the phone as close to word for word as I could remember, with the date and time beside it. I found 4 charges on my secondary credit card that I hadn't made a spa appointment, a dinner for 2 at a restaurant in the next town over, a pair of boots from an online store. The card had been in my kitchen junk drawer. I had given my son the number once, 18 months ago, when his own card was maxed out and the girls needed school supplies. I didn't say anything. I just printed the statements and added them to the folder. A friend of mine, a retired nurse named Beverly, who has known me since our daughters were in Girl Scouts together, came over for lunch one Thursday. We sat in the sunroom with sandwiches and she asked, with the directness that only old friends have earned, "How are you really doing?" I told her everything. Not emotionally, just factually. Beverly listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Do you have a copy of your deed?" I did. She gave me the name of an attorney who had handled her sister's estate. She said, "Just go talk to him. You don't have to do anything. Just know your options." The attorney's name was Gerald. He had an office on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, and he listened to me the way Beverly had without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "You understand that without a formal agreement in place, removing them becomes more complicated the longer they've been there." I said, "I understand that now." He explained the process. He was methodical and kind about it, the way good doctors are when they explain something serious. He told me what I would need. He told me what a notice would look like. He told me that if anyone attempted to argue that I was not competent to manage my own affairs, my documentation would be one of the most important things I had. I asked him what he meant by that. He looked at me carefully. He said, "Sometimes, when a family member decides they want to stay, they look for reasons the homeowner needs their help, rather than the other way around." I thought about Diane on the phone. She doesn't even know what day it is. I drove home and went straight to my computer. I updated every entry in the folder. I added dates to the photographs. I wrote a clear, factual account of the conversation I had overheard in October. I printed everything and organized it into a binder with labeled tabs. Then I backed up all of it to an external drive and put the drive in my fireproof safe behind the winter coats in my closet. That weekend, Carol asked me if I had thought about the fact that this house might be too big for one person to maintain. I was deadheading the roses in the backyard. I looked up at her. She was standing on the porch holding her coffee, squinting at me in the sun, her dog weaving around her ankles. I said, "I've been maintaining it for 30 years. She made a small noise. That wasn't a real sound, just a suggestion of one. The kind people make when they don't believe you but don't want to say so directly. I went back to my roses. The following Tuesday, I drove to a copy center and printed 2 identical envelopes. Inside each one was a formal notice of lease terms, prepared with Gerald's help. It was not a threat. It was not dramatic. It was simply a document stating that, as of that date, any person residing in my home who was not my son or his immediate family was required to either formalize their arrangement in writing or make plans to leave within 30 days. It stated clearly that my son's own stay, which had now exceeded 18 months beyond the originally discussed time frame, would require a signed and dated rental agreement going forward, with rent set at $800 per month. I left one envelope on the kitchen counter with my son's name on it. I slid the other one under the door of the room where Carol had been sleeping. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the sunroom and watched the birds at my feeder. My son came to find me within the hour. He was holding the envelope with both hands, like it might do something unexpected. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from when he was a teenager, and I had caught him in a lie, not angry. Exactly, more like recalibrating. He said, "Mom, is this because of something Diane said?" I said, "No. It's because 18 months became 20, and I let it happen without a conversation. And that was my mistake. I'm having the conversation now." He started to say something about the girls, about how hard everything had been, about how Diane was still looking for steady work, about how Carol had been a help to Diane, about how he hadn't known I felt this way. I let him finish. Then I said, "I know it's been hard. I have been glad to help, and I am asking you now, as your mother, to hear me clearly. This is my home. It was never temporary for me." He was quiet. His jaw worked the way his father's used to when he was thinking hard about something and trying not to show it. He said, "I'll talk to Diane." I nodded. I turned back to the window. After a moment, I heard him walk back to the kitchen. What happened next surprised me a little, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Diane did not come to talk to me. She went to Carol. I could hear their voices from upstairs that evening, the rise and fall of them, the specific music of 2 people constructing a shared version of events. The next morning, Carol appeared at the breakfast table with the expression of someone who had been grievously wronged. She said that she had assumed she was a welcome guest. She said she had been trying to help. She said that she thought of my home as a safe place for the whole family, and she was hurt to learn that wasn't mutual. I poured my coffee. I said, "Carol, I appreciate the ways you've helped, and I need my home to be mine again. That's all this is." She pressed her lips together. She said, "Diane told me you've been forgetting things, that we've been keeping an eye out." I set my mug down. I looked at her directly, the way you look at someone when you want to make sure they understand that you see them. I said, "I haven't forgotten a single thing." She left 4 days later. She didn't say goodbye to me directly. She came downstairs with both suitcases and butterscotch in his carrier and said something to Diane about calling when she got in. My son carried her bags to her car. I watched from the kitchen window. That afternoon, I cleaned the room she'd been using. I found 7 of my good towels folded on the chair. She had replaced them with her own when she arrived and apparently returned them when she left. I held one of them for a moment. It was a small thing, but it was mine, and I was glad to have it back. Over the following weeks, the process was slow and not entirely graceful. My son and Diane had one conversation with me together where Diane spoke mostly in grievances. She said I had made her mother feel unwelcome. She said the notice had been humiliating. She said she had been doing her best in an impossible situation. I let her finish. I said, "I know you've been under pressure. I am not trying to hurt you. I am asking that we agree to terms." She looked at me the way people look at someone when they have already decided who the person is, and no evidence to the contrary will change that. My son signed the rental agreement 3 days later. Diane did not. Her name wasn't required. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a long noise stops. Not silence, exactly more like the room remembering itself. That's what began to happen as November moved into December. The refrigerator held only what I had bought. The towels on the rack in my bathroom were mine. The television in the evenings was whatever I wanted. Lily and June still came to my kitchen table after school and drew pictures. That didn't change. I made sure of it. Whatever had happened between the adults, those two small faces at my table, that was not collateral damage if I had anything to say about it. One afternoon in early December, June climbed onto my lap while I was reading and asked me why Grandma Carol went home. I said, she missed her own house. Everyone does, eventually. June considered this. Then she said, do you miss your house when you're away? I said, I love my house so much, I never want to be very far from it. She seemed satisfied with that. She picked up my book, looked at the cover, decided it wasn't interesting, and went to find her crayons. My son made an effort in January. He started putting the garbage bins out on Tuesday nights without being reminded. He shoveled the front walk after the snowstorm. He came to find me one Sunday afternoon while I was repotting my African violets, and he stood in the doorway of the sunroom with his hands in his pockets, and he said, Mom, I think I missed some things. I looked up. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. We didn't say anything else about it for a while. Some things don't need more words than that. What matters is what comes after them. Diane was cooler with me for a long time. She moved through the house like a person who had lost an argument and was not finished being angry about it, even if she couldn't say so directly. I didn't push. I gave her the thing I had learned that she had never given me, which was space to work it out on her own timeline. In February, she asked me how I made my chicken soup. She was standing in the kitchen doorway while I was cooking, and her voice had the careful tone of someone extending something tentatively, not sure if it will be taken. I told her, onion, celery, a whole chicken, bay leaves, more salt than you think, and thyme. The thyme is the part people always want to skip. She watched for a while. Then she went back to the living room. But she came back the next Sunday and stood at the stove beside me, and I handed her a wooden spoon and talked her through it. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something smaller and more honest than that. It was two women standing in a kitchen, one of them learning something from the other, both of them deciding that was enough for now. The rental agreement was for 6 months. When it came up for renewal, my son asked if we could renegotiate. I said yes. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had sat at for 30 years, and we talked about what made sense. The amount went up slightly. The terms were clear. We both signed. Afterward, he made coffee and I made toast, and we sat for a while without talking, which is its own kind of conversation. That spring, I replanted the garden. I put in tomatoes and zucchini and a row of sunflowers along the back fence that I had always meant to do and never gotten around to. Lily helped me dig the holes for the sunflower seedlings. She was very serious about it, kneeling in the dirt with a small trowel, measuring the spacing with the focused intensity that 7-year-olds bring to important work. She asked me if the flowers would be as tall as me by summer. I said, taller. She looked at the small green stems in the ground and then up at me, deciding whether to believe this. I said, come check in August. She nodded like we had made a contract. In a way, I suppose we had. My friend Beverly came for lunch on a Thursday in April. We sat in the sunroom, the windows open to the sound of the neighbor's lawnmower and the birds moving through the yard. She asked how things were. I said, better, clearer. She said, I'm glad you went to see Gerald. I said, I'm glad you gave me his name. She said, you know what the hardest thing is? Letting yourself matter enough to do something about it. I thought about that for a long time after she left. I walked through the house slowly, not going anywhere in particular, just moving through the rooms the way you do when you're paying attention to something you almost let go of. The kitchen with its good light, the sunroom with its view of the garden, the bedroom with the quilt I had made the winter after my husband died, piece by piece through the long, cold months, my hands busy while the grief moved through me. The bedroom where I'd sat on the edge of the bed 18 months ago and listened to Diane on the phone and felt the particular cold of hearing yourself described as a problem to be managed. I sat there again now. The room was quiet. The quilt was on the bed, same as it had always been. Everything in its place. I had let myself matter enough to do something about it. Not loudly, not with drama, not in a way that required anyone else to acknowledge it before it could be real. I had simply looked at what was true and acted on it, the way I'd been taught years ago. That you act on most things that matter, quietly, carefully, with the kind of patience that comes from knowing something is yours and intending to keep it. I went downstairs and started dinner. I put water on for pasta and sliced the last of the winter squash I'd kept in the pantry. I set the table for 4. From upstairs, I could hear the girls running the length of the hallway, their laughter bouncing off the walls, and Diane's voice telling them to slow down before someone got hurt. No one got hurt. The squash was sweet, and the pasta was just right, and June told me a story about her class hamster that went on much longer than it needed to and was the best part of the evening. Later, after the girls were in bed and my son had fallen asleep on the couch watching something neither of us had been paying attention to, I went to the back door and stood there for a while, looking out at the garden. The sunflowers were still just seedlings, small and brave in the dark. By August, they would be taller than me. I intended to see it. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. My house was quiet in the way that means it is full of people who are supposed to be here. I know the difference now. It took me longer than it should have, but I know it. That's enough.